Today's podcast is sponsored by the Association of Mature American Citizens, the only conservative alternative to AARP. Go to amac.us/Carter. Guys, we have Gordon Chang on the show today. He is the author of The Coming Collapse of China, From Your Mouth to God's Ears, Gordon. He will join me to talk about everything China and the CCP, the threat that we face as Americans from the Chinese Communist Party, which is so significant, and one that is not being readily spoken about openly on our media enough. I feel that if anything does happen, it's going to come as a surprise to the American people. You guys do not want to miss this. We're going to be talking about Xi Jinping's extreme measures to achieve basically zero COVID in his country and what that has done to the people in China. I mean, from throwing themselves, some of them, off their high-rise buildings to their deaths, people wailing and screaming in terror, people being subjected to all kinds of brutality, and even what is happening right now to the Uyghurs in China and other minority populations, and how that will eventually lead to the oppression and the targeting, which it already is happening, of Christians in China. Yes, this is happening there. All populations, minority populations in China are facing this dire threat. You do not want to miss this because it isn't just about them, folks. Gordon explains how if the Chinese Communist Party under President Xi is willing to do that to the Chinese people, imagine what they are doing with us. And I'm going to talk to him about irregular warfare in the United States, about fentanyl spreading across our country and these counterfeit pills. We lost over 107,000 people in 2021. So we need to pay attention to what's happening in China because it affects us directly here. It affects our nation. Please follow and subscribe. Get all the links at saracarter.com. That's saracarter.com. And while you're there, I want you to sign up for our email list. This way you don't get shadow banned. I mean, once we can stay connected through email, we can get all the stories you need, everything you need, right to your inbox. Nobody's going to be able to stop that. Nobody but you. Okay? So I want to be able to communicate with you directly. Before I get to Gordon Chang, I want to talk to you a little bit about spring. I love going outside and gardening. It's like one of my favorite things. If you follow me on Instagram at Sara Carter DC on Instagram, you'll see I take a lot of pictures of my garden and, I'm putting flowers up around my pool, and I'm so excited that we have spring and summer here so I can watch all the flowers. Well, I have a great new sponsor for the show, and it's fastgrowingtrees.com. That's fastgrowingtrees.com. And they will literally get the plants that are good for your environment, your region of the country where you live, right to your door. It's so awesome. It'll just show up. You can go online, you can tell them where you live, and fastgrowingtrees.com will help you find the plants that are right for your region of the country. It is absolutely amazing, and it's so much fun, and it's such a great thing to do to de-stress, right? It's to get out there and garden, be one with nature, and I like to have my kids go out with me, and we garden together. I promise you I'm going to post more of my vegetable garden on Instagram this week. I will put it up there so you guys can see it, but I want you to go to fastgrowingtrees.com. That's fastgrowingtrees.com. Even if you've never had a green thumb, right? They'll make you feel like you do. 1 million home gardeners have already seen what fastgrowingtrees.com can do for them. I'm going to tell you what it's going to do for you. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com/Carter right now. So you got to use Carter to get your discount, and you'll get a 15% off discount your entire order. Think about that. 15% off your entire orders at fastgrowingtree.com/Carter. fastgrowingtrees.com/Carter. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about what happened this weekend, because I was stunned and I was horrified again at the actions of a very sick, twisted, and apparently very racist individual who's also extremely young, 18 years old, in Buffalo. That shooting that left 10 people dead occurred in a predominantly Black neighborhood. There was a manifesto, and I really do not want to use his name, so I won't, left by this shooter that was pretty horrific. I don't know what's happening to our country. And this isn't about gun violence, guys. This is about ideological divisions that have occurred, and by an internet that is raising our children, and by people that are putting ideas into our young child's minds and tearing us apart, dividing us, and making it, by the way, these actions are going to have repercussions, right? They're going to have repercussions. We're going to end up actually, I think, facing something far worse in the upcoming weeks. Who knows? And then we saw, of course, the shooting at the Presbyterian Church in Orange County, where one person was killed. And thank God, thank God people were able to stop this gunman. But think about the 10 lives that were lost. And think about what people feel like when they're being targeted. When there is a shooter on the loose and you feel like you have no place to go. Imagine the horror of that, right? Imagine the horror of that. The manifesto was full of the ugliest kinds of racism. I think the tough part for me here, and it's on both sides of the aisle right now, is using this as a political ploy. But I want you to hear what the left is trying to do. And the left is trying to blame conservatives for the actions of this very sick and twisted individual. This is Dana Bash Sunday on CNN's State of the Union. Listen.
The racist purported manifesto is based on the really repugnant white supremacist idea that people of color are replacing white people in the United States. And as you know, this isn't just a fringe theory on the corner of the internet. It's being pushed by right-wing media personalities and some political figures. What do you say to them? And do they share any responsibility in this attack?
That's unbelievable to me. That's absolutely stunning to me that she would make that kind of statement. But I want to talk to you a little bit about, and I brought this up before, about how powerful and how dangerous the media can be. And they are setting up a situation that is going to turn out really, really bad. If you go back to Rwanda, to the very beginnings of the Hutus and the Tutsis and their fight, the tribal fight that led to the genocide in Rwanda, all you have to do is go back to the Kigali radio station and listen and read stories about how the radio station turned one tribe against the other tribe. This tribe, the Hutus, thought that the Tutsis got all the benefits, reaped all the rewards of the government because they looked this way, while the Hutus didn't, have the same aspirations or goals, or they didn't want to work. I mean, this was like a back and forth between the tribes until there was a slaughter. And they slaughtered one another. And it was a genocide. I think over 800,000 people. This scares me to death. This type of rhetoric that says that, that conservatives or people who, obviously we know who they're talking about, guest hosts of conservative opinionated shows are creating this kind of racism, are feeding it, is a lie. It is a lie. Unfortunately, since the beginning of mankind, there have been issues with certain people and certain groups, and even with nation states. We saw that in our own history with racism. But this situation does not paint everything. That's illogical. Don't believe these lies. Don't feed into these lies. The left is trying to say over and over again that, oh, I can't understand. We saw that with Sunny on The View. I can't understand why a black person would want to be a conservative or a Hispanic. It doesn't make sense to me. Because it's not about color. It's about fundamentally an idea. Being a conservative is saying, hey, nowadays you could be anything you want to be if you work hard enough. I don't need a government handout. I want to be able to raise my child this way. I don't believe the government should be fully involved in my life 24/7. That's it. But that's not what's happening. I want you to listen to Ana Navarro on The View because she took it even a step further. I can't stand her. Listen to this.
And listen, if you are an advertiser, advertising on that station, you are part of the problem. If you sit on the board and are trying to be a civilized person, Paul Ryan, my friend, I'm talking to you, you are part of the problem. Yep. If you're a Republican donor tweeting about how bad you feel about this, but you're donating to people like Liz Stefanik, you are part of the problem. Yeah. If you are a staffer working for them, you are part of the problem. If you are voting for them, you are part of the problem. So I'll tell you what great replacement theory should be. We should replace all these people peddling hate and making financial and political gain from spreading racism. We should replace them with people who hold up American values.
You're right, Ana Navarro. We should replace you. We really should. You should be fired from The View. You're a liar. You are turning people against one another. You are the problem. You are the problem. And I'm not saying there isn't people on the right that are the problem, but guys, we've got to stop this. This was a sick individual. This was a sick individual. No normal human being would do what this young man did. This vile act of hatred. No normal person. This person was sick. We know that from their history. So we need to put everything into perspective here. There are not white people all across this country, ready to commit mass murder against African Americans or Latinos or anyone else. I think of myself, right? My mom was an immigrant from Cuba. My great-great-grandmother was from West Africa on my mom's side. We all have a mix of everything inside us. This type of rhetoric that Ana Navarro, Dana Bash, and if there is rhetoric from the right, if there are groups on the right that are pushing racist ideas to our young people, gosh, as parents, we better be watching what they are doing on the internet. Right? Because especially if we have somebody in our family who's mentally ill, somebody who could take action without, any responsibility towards life or someone else's life, we should be thinking about these things. But I'm telling you this right now, this type of rhetoric is dangerous. This type of rhetoric is damaging our country. And this type of rhetoric that Ana Navarro and the rest of them are pushing, which is a bunch of lies, is exactly what our enemies want us to be doing. They want us to divide. A house divided amongst itself, it cannot survive. And that's what's happening now. You want to talk about disinformation? You want to talk about what's happening in the world? Just look at what's happening to our nation right now. Our enemies are lapping it up. They're drooling. They're like dogs chained up, ready to come after us. Because we're doing it to ourselves. We're weakening our own country. I want you to listen to this clip. This is House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and she's already talking about limiting free speech. Listen to this.
How can we hold these social media companies accountable? You do have this free speech issue.
Well, obviously you have to balance the free speech issues, but you also have to be able to, when you see a prospect for violence, and it's not just one thing, it's communities of similar thinking who gravitate toward each other. That's what produced some other violence in our country as well. And America is a great country. Our freedom is so important to us, but that freedom also carries a public safety with it, and we have to balance those.
Oh, and I'm sure Nancy Pelosi is will be absolutely wonderful as the head of a disinformation governance board, to tell us what we can and cannot talk about. This is about encroaching on free speech. This is about dividing our country even further. This is about making people feel worse about themselves, even when they've done nothing wrong. guys, we have to stand up to this and we have to do the right thing. And we have to teach our children to be kind to one another. Yes, of course. Each parent is responsible for that. And, before I get to Gordon Chang, I want to talk a little bit more about AMAC. I'm so grateful that they're a sponsor for this show. And we're going to talk about what I just talked about so much more in upcoming episodes. I don't want to forget it, but we got to get to Gordon Chang. And I think what he has to say is a lesson for all of us. But AMAC is so important. AMAC is an organization that's going to fight the good fight, guys. It's going to get out there up on Capitol Hill and confront people like Nancy Pelosi and confront people on the right as well and say, hey, what are you doing for American small businesses? What are you doing about securing our border? What are you doing to support our military and respect our veterans? And this is an organization that actually believes in kneeling before God, right? So by joining AMAC, you're taking the very first steps to saving the America that you love. AMAC offers an alternative to just about every benefit that AARP offers. But guess what? It doesn't come with a liberal agenda. I stand with AMAC, and I hope that you will too. I encourage you to join today at amac.us/Carter. That's amac.us/CARTER. The benefits of membership are great, but the cause is even greater. Join today at amac.us/Carter. I am so excited to have Gordon Chang on the show. He's not only, I think, one of the most world-renowned experts in China, he's a columnist, and he's the author of the book, The Coming Collapse of China, which you all can get on Amazon.com. I want you to follow him on Twitter. If you want to know the truth about China, if you want to understand how this affects us, the geopolitical ramifications of how we handle China, you're going to want to follow Gordon Chang. That's at Gordon G. Chang on Twitter. Gordon, so nice to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This is terrific.
Yeah, it's absolutely been astonishing to me what we have all experienced over the last several years so overtly with relation to China. And that's why I thought it was so important to bring you back on the show. I always want you on the show, but I know that everybody is pulling you left and right, especially when it comes to China, because there's so few experts that are able to talk with such authority on it as yourself. Let's start out with the lockdowns, Gordon, because this is something that I'm hearing from my listeners, something I'm hearing from my readers. There's a lot of concern right now, what is happening in Shanghai and now in Beijing. And we've also seen what's happened in North Korea with these massive lockdowns that are literally driving people to suicide. We've seen horrific videos. What do you think's going on there?
I think this is primarily political. Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, wants a precedent-breaking third term as Communist Party's general secretary. If tradition holds, the party will hold its 20th National Congress in October or November, where that decision will be made. And Xi Jinping himself is considered to be the author of the dynamic zero COVID policy, as it's called. And that means that even though it's clear that this policy isn't working, even though it's clear that this policy is devastating Chinese society and the Chinese economy, he's not giving an inch. And the reason is that if he gives an inch, that's an admission. And if it's an admission, his political enemies will use it against him. So he's holding out to the very last end on this zero COVID policy, as we saw in Shanghai and as we're now seeing in Beijing.
So Shanghai, we're hearing that Shanghai is ready to end its COVID lockdown. And they're saying it's going to return to normal life. At least that's what Reuters and others are reporting by June. I got to tell you, Gordon, I'm just going to, because this podcast, we can talk about anything we want here and we can dissect it. I'm really worried that the Communist Party under Xi Jinping has actually maybe some information about a new variant of the virus. I've always been concerned about these lockdowns. I've always felt that, even in the original virus, which now our State Department and others believe that the Wuhan laboratory was actually fiddling with for gain of function, that they know something more than we do. And I'm worried. I'm just worried that maybe there's something out there that we don't know enough about and that the Communist Party cares very little about when it comes to locking down because they don't want to lose their hold on power.
Yeah, this is an important foundation point, and that is we do not understand the maliciousness of the Chinese regime. there is controversy over the origin of SARS-CoV-2, the pathogen causing COVID-19. I think it came from a lab. That's the preponderance of evidence. But even if you don't believe that, we know one thing for 100%, Sarah, and that is the Chinese regime, once this disease got out into Wuhan and Chinese society, they deliberately spread it beyond their borders. They knew for at least 5 weeks that COVID-19 was extremely contagious, but they told the world, including the United States, that it was not.
Including the World Health Organization, World Health Organization and RCDC and everybody else, that they were saying that this was not transmissible, human to human. But they knew it was because they could see what it was doing inside China. And then at the same time, they were locking down their own society. Now, lockdowns are controversial, but by locking down Wuhan and surrounding cities, they were basically telling the world they thought this was an effective technique for stopping disease. While they were locking down their own country, they were pressuring the United States and others not to impose travel restrictions and quarantines on arrivals from China. And it was those arrivals that took a disease which should have been just contained to China, and they made it a global pandemic. You put those two things together, and there are more, but you put just those two things together, it shows that the spread of the disease was deliberate. That means we're talking 1 million American deaths are murders. And there's, of course, 6 million, it's about 6.5 million people outside of China that have died from this disease. So this is the maliciousness of the regime itself. And you have to start with that foundational point, and then you go from there to interpret what's going on in Shanghai, Beijing, and elsewhere. Why do you think it is, Gordon, that U.S. policymakers, for the most part, in the administration, are so afraid of holding China accountable? And I'm talking about the bureaucracy. I'm talking about during President Trump's presidency, even till now. I mean, I think President Trump was the one that did speak out against China, but you had people within his administration doing the same thing, pandering, lowering the bar, not holding China accountable, not calling. I don't think we've had one major investigation yet, have we?
Well, no. The Biden administration on May 24th was pressured by the American people to open that intelligence community investigation into the origins of the disease. But that really looks like it was politically motivated, because the report that popped out on August 27th, I think, really doesn't explain a lot of things. But putting that aside for a moment, your question about, well, why do American policymakers, why are they afraid to confront China? There's a lot of things at work here. I mean, some of them are actually corrupt. And I don't think that's the majority of them, but there are those who are corrupt. But also, there has been the view for 5 decades that the United States needed to engage China to bring it into the international system, that as China got stronger, it would become benign, it would become a partner. This is American thinking that goes back decades. And so it's really hard to break. Now, Trump moved away from the engagement policy, but still many people subscribe to it. And also, when you look at Biden, it's very clear, especially John Kerry, the climate czar, they believe they need China's cooperation on various issues, climate change, an Iran nuke deal. And so they don't want to anger Beijing. So you put a lot of this stuff together. Oh, and one other thing, and this goes back to Bill Clinton, who is basically telling the idea, oh, look, the Chinese are going to dominate the world, so we need to be nice to them while they're still, where they are. And all of those, I believe, are wrong. So I believe that this is just horrible policy, both morally and strategically wrong.
Well, after, you talk about this since Nixon, maybe even previous, but especially since Nixon. And I remember seeing Henry Kissinger speaking. I went to an event years ago in Washington, D.C., where he was talking about his book on China. I never forgot it, because I had a girl came right up to a table with me. She was a Chinese journalist, and she was so excited to meet me and really, really wanted to be my friend, wanted me to go to Beijing. And I kind of knew what was going on there. But I look at this after all these decades, right, of us knowing what is happening, literally having people like you and people within our intelligence community warning about what China is doing, warning about how they're playing us, what their goals are, what their intentions are, that we've had no course correction with foreign policy on this. We've not said, okay, wait a minute, I get it. We all thought this was going to happen. Nixon believed it. Henry Kissinger believed it, but we've seen the truth and now we're going to back away from it. And morally, as you just pointed out, there is a moral implication here because our nation stands on fundamental principles. And what's happening in China with the Uyghurs, what's happening in China with the Chinese people goes against every one of our principles.
Yes. Well, look, we have 1 million COVID-19 deaths.
Right.
These are murders. And to sort of say, oh, it doesn't matter. And then, of course, there are the fentanyl deaths, which are also intentional. But, you run through the catalog of what China is doing. We got to remember that People's Daily, which is the most authoritative publication in China, in May 2019 declared a quote-unquote people's war on the U.S. And we have a president now who doesn't say that China's an enemy. He doesn't even say that they're an adversary. He calls them a competitor. But if we look at what the Chinese are saying, this is not the actions of a quote-unquote competitor. These are the actions of an enemy. And we got to remember that Xi Jinping, all of this century, has been pushing this notion that China is the world's only sovereign state, which if you start to think about the implications of it, it means that Americans are basically without sovereignty, that we're basically a colony of China. This is important that we listen to what the Chinese actually say. Now, this stuff is ludicrous. I grant you that. But the point is, not that it's ludicrous. The point is the Chinese actually believe this. The Chinese are propagating this notion. We got to listen to what they say. We didn't listen to Osama bin Laden. We need to listen to the Chinese.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't agree with you so much on this. I agree with you 100%. And I feel like there's so few of us that are, and especially you, I mean, beating the drums publicly, making, these statements. I know the Chinese government must be so proud of you, Gordon. They must be watching you like a hawk, right? And you're standing up to this regime and fighting for what is honestly the sanctity, I think, of all mankind on earth right now. We all remember the stories of the Chinese government like welding citizens into their homes, right? We saw the long lines for food. We heard the yelling of agony from the balconies, this authoritarian nightmare. I want you to take a listen to this. This is Shanghai residents and their cries of desperation. This is the terror the Chinese regime is inflicting on their own people. They are desperate for food. They're desperate for social interaction, and they've actually been caged like animals. And I'd like you to respond to this, Gordon. What's your response to that, Gordon? When you hear that, the Chinese people crying out, yelling in agony, what is your response?
My response is what you said, and that is, look, they're doing this to their own people. Imagine what they would do to us. I mean, this just shows you the maliciousness of this regime. When you start to look at it, we have to realize that their zero COVID policy is not working. It's even worse than that. It's actually spreading the disease. It is destroying Chinese society. And yet they continue it for a political reason, the political fortunes of one individual, Xi Jinping. You have to imagine what this system would be like. Remember, China believes that this system should rule the world. They believe that this notion of tianxia, that Chinese rule all under heaven. Also, they're communists, which they believe that communism should dominate the world. So for those two reasons, they believe that they should rule, and they alone should rule the world. So we've got to understand this is symptomatic of what they're going to do. This tells us this is a warning.
Let's think about that. This is a warning. This is a warning. And I want to go to the southern border for just a minute before I go to the Uyghurs with you. But the southern border, I've been talking about this forever. And you brought it up earlier, the fentanyl coming across our border. The Chinese government under President Trump said, okay, fine, we're not going to ship fentanyl, direct. We're going to stop that behavior. And all of a sudden, they started shipping precursor chemicals into Mexico so that the Mexican cartels could basically create their own fentanyl there, make the fentanyl in Mexico, and then they are putting it into counterfeit pills. And I hate saying laced because I want everyone out there to listen to me and then listen, please, to what Gordon has to say after this. The pills that they are dumping on our streets from the Mexican drug cartels that are literally being put together by Chinese precursor chemicals are pure fentanyl. They are not laced. We're not finding a Percocet with a little bit of fentanyl in it. They are literally putting compounds together that contain fentanyl, and our children are dying. Our citizens are dying. We lost over 107,000 people in 2021. We're going to lose more this year. I believe this is irregular warfare by the Chinese government on the United States of America, and I believe it should be treated as such, and we're not doing that.
We're not doing that, and we got to realize that fentanyl deaths in the United States are murders. China is murdering American citizens. These fentanyl gangs that either make the drug itself or make the compounds, they are large, they're far-flung, they're international in scope, and in a near total surveillance state, which China now operates, these gangs could not do anything without not only the knowledge of Beijing and the Communist Party, but also with their approval. And in many cases, we believe that the Communist Party cadres actually benefit financially from this. We also know, Sarah, that the state financial system in the state banks in China, they launder the proceeds of the fentanyl gangs. So this is the Chinese central government and the Communist Party are behind these fentanyl deaths. And we should be treating these as China's murders of American citizens.
Why aren't we? Is it back to the same argument that we made earlier? I mean, why are we ignoring this? I feel like this is the Trojan horse. Or remember that commercial that used to be on television way back when? I might be aging myself, but remember when the elephant's walking through the house and they're talking about alcoholism and the whole family's pretending that there's not an elephant knocking everything over in the house? Is it going to be just too late by the time we admit what's going on here?
Yeah, there are a couple things at work. I think part of it is because we've lived in peace for quite some time, we have a very difficult time comprehending the notion of evil. We cannot comprehend the maliciousness of the Chinese system. So we don't view fentanyl sales in that way. We sort of think of China as being organized the way the United States is. There's a government, there are criminals, we chase after the criminals. In China, that's very different because of their surveillance mechanisms. They know exactly what's going on, or they choose not to know. So these fentanyl gangs operate with the blessing of the Communist Party. And in fact, the Communist Party wants to do this because this goes back to the 1840s, the Opium Wars. The Chinese believe that they have a right to kill Westerners, British and Americans, because of the Opium Wars in the 1840s. And this is a constant theme that you see in Chinese propaganda. So it's just a failure to understand the nature of the Chinese system. As you said, this is warfare. It certainly is warfare.
I remember reading a book, and I wish I could find it right now. I found it just the other day. I wish I would have had it here with me. But it was based on the unrestricted warfare. It was the Chinese military. I'm sure you're very familiar with it. But how the Chinese government believed and believes wholeheartedly that they can overtake the United States economically, culturally, fundamentally, without ever raising a weapon to us, that they can just infiltrate our country on every level and break it down. And this was actually a plan that was established by the Chinese military, I believe. Is this what we're seeing today?
Yes. There's the 1999 book by then two Chinese Air Force colonels called Unrestricted Warfare. And the thesis of the book is simply that China should think about all sorts of various types of activities which are generally not considered to be war by Americans, but they are, and that China should use them, and there should be no rules. There is a report unconfirmed, but there's a report that General Chi Ha-tan, who was defense minister about 2005, actually gave a secret speech saying that China should use biological weapons to clear out North America, to kill virtually every American, so that China would then have the land to then settle for themselves. This is sort of like a Hitler theme of Liebestrausen, living space. This just shows what unrestricted warfare means. It means the deaths of hundreds of millions of Americans, the end of the American Republic.
And I really believe that, and I'm so grateful that you brought that up, because it is terrifying. And I think that so many Americans, come from their own perspective. Like you said, they treat the rest of the world as if the rest of the world operated like America, and it doesn't. It's this kind of naivete that there's no way that there's no way that that's ever going to happen. Like, if we're nice enough, if we take care of things enough, if we talk enough, it won't happen. But we see what's happening to the Uyghurs in China, Gordon. We see what's happening to the Chinese people in general. But let's talk about the Uyghurs for a minute, because I don't want to forget them. What is happening with them, the sterilization of the women, the forced labor, the abuse, the maltreatment. I mean, it's like, it literally is a living hell for them.
Yes, you're talking about the detention of somewhere maybe 3.3 million Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Turkic minorities in facilities that meet the definition of concentration camps. Uyghurs and others are being tortured in those camps. We know they're dying. A couple of years ago, China actually built a crematorium between two of these concentration camps. Uyghur women are being raped as a matter of government policy. As you point out, they're being sterilized, forced abortions. Uyghur women are being transported around China to work in factories that look like concentration camps. By the way, Nike took advantage of this, by the way. But in any event, the point here is that this is the treatment of Uyghurs and Kazakhs as subhumans. And we know that the Chinese view Uyghurs that way. This is also true for Tibetans. We are going to see the same treatment for others around China, other minorities, and also for Christians and other people of faith. So this is the Chinese system. This is the system that they will impose on other lands if they have the power to do so.
I mean, it's so horrifying because, and I think what's even more frightening is I remember reading an article not too long ago, and I don't think it was Dennis Prager who wrote it. And he wrote, or it might have been just released by Prager University, but it was The Good German. I know why, basically there's the good German. And I was thinking about that when it comes to China, right? And the failure of our nation, right, to hold accountable or to speak out against these atrocities, or to continue to do business with a nation that is literally killing its own people and torturing its own people. And I mean, doing things that I think are unspeakable, the raping of the Uyghur women, sterilizing, genocide. Like, there's nothing more atrocious than what we are talking about right now, what they are doing to these people. But Gordon, why do you think the media has failed to address this the way we need to address it? Why are we just sitting back on our laurels and, not doing the right thing?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that because, you talk about genocide. What China is doing in Xinjiang or East Turkestan, as the locals call it, does meet the definition of genocide in the Genocide Convention of 1948. Both the Trump and the Biden administrations have declared that China is committing genocide. Now, under Article 1 of that convention, we have an obligation, a treaty obligation, to prevent and to punish acts of genocide, and yet we're not. The Biden administration and the Trump administration, they impose sanctions on low-level officials, and that's a good start. But we got to remember that this campaign of crimes against humanity and atrocities, including genocide, comes from the top of the Chinese political system. So we should be imposing these sanctions and actually doing far more to make sure that China cannot commit these acts. These are, as you say, unspeakable.
You know, I want to go really quick back to the Uyghurs again, because I don't want to let this go. A source of mine in Pakistan had informed me months ago that there were Uyghurs that had crossed into Afghanistan, and that they were joining together with others to try to fight the Chinese government on what was happening, basically forming small terrorist, or what they would consider, the Chinese government would consider a terrorist organization, what the Uyghurs would consider freedom fighters, right? To go back in. I had heard from this source, who has well-placed people within the government, that there were several attacks inside the province, small attacks, but significant enough that the Chinese government didn't want it to leak, and it never did leak, apparently. These little attacks against Chinese military, against the Chinese government in that region where the Uyghurs are. Is there any possibility whatsoever, Gordon, because considering their kind of power, that the people of China, Uyghurs, or others could stand up from within and eventually break the back of the communist government after all these decades?
Every so often, the Chinese people rise up against oppressive rulers. It happens periodically. We are seeing the extreme frustration in Shanghai, for instance, and at this moment in Beijing, where you have students at the two premier universities in China, Peking University, the Harvard of China, as it's called, and Tsinghua University, the MIT of China, are now demonstrating. I'm not saying that they will be able to bring down the government, but I am saying that we are seeing frustration and a fundamental change in the attitude of people in China. So I do believe that there will be momentous events that history will remember. The backdrop for all of this is, you look back at 1989. What brought people into the streets in 1989 was the death of a Communist Party figure who was beloved. But it was really, the frustration was economic, the mismanagement of growth, inflation. Right now in China, you have, for the first time in living memory of many Chinese, a real downturn. And this breaks what is generally called the bargain between the Communist Party saying, we deliver economic prosperity, you give us obedience politically. That bargain is now being broken, and we don't know what the consequences of that will be, especially because there's the intense infighting at the top of the Communist Party. A lot of things are going wrong. So when you look at the problems in Xinjiang, East Turkestan, those by themselves can't bring the Communist Party down, but they're occurring at a time where the party has to face simultaneous crises that it can't deal with. And so it contributes to the weakness of the regime. This is a pattern we've seen in Chinese history. It occurs every so often.
That's incredible. What do you think he'll do, President Xi? Do you think that he might try to save face by maybe going into Taiwan? We've seen the reports right now. The Taiwanese airspace, they've actually tracked Chinese helicopters in that area. Is there any concern about that? And do you think that, and I'm going to jump to the Taiwan right now, that the Taiwanese people watching what's happening right now in Ukraine can maybe get their, male-aged or female-aged fighters together, and start preparing maybe for an invasion? The Chinese government, is it capable of doing that, or is it capable of doing it without a military invasion?
Beijing would like to take Taiwan without the use of force, but it really can't, because there's been a fundamental change in the opinion of people in Taiwan. And this is because of the nature of self-identity. In Taiwan these days, about 80%, maybe 85%, depending on the survey, self-identify as Taiwanese only. And these days, under 5% identify themselves as Chinese only. So Taiwan as a society says, yeah, of course we want good relations with Beijing, but we're not China. We are Taiwan. And Beijing says, no, you're China. So I don't think that Chinese propaganda has been especially effective, especially after 2019. The people in Taiwan saw what China did to Hong Kong. And so the people in Taiwan changed their views fundamentally 2019, and that process is continuing to go forward. Yeah, I have to really worry about what China will do because it realizes it has to use force, so it very well may. We've heard April Haynes, the Director of National Intelligence, talk about the threat as being a critical one. So right now, China can take us by surprise. And a regime which is in distress, and the Chinese regime is capable of anything.
And that also includes those effects have ripple effects across the globe. I mean, Taiwan produces 92% of all the semiconductors that we use. So manufacturing capacity, all of that Taiwan, all of what Taiwan has, we are reliant on. And I wonder how that's going to affect us once China takes over. Maybe I better put it this way. I feel like we need to ask China permission if we ever go to war with it. Right, with the nation, with the Communist Party, because they make pretty much a ton of our military equipment. If they take Taiwan, it's the semiconductor issue. They have all of over 90% of our antibiotics are made in China. I mean, what have we done here? I mean, I don't know how we're going to win this thing unless we fundamentally change the way we are thinking, Gordon, and listen to you and others who are screaming out the warning.
To me, it's incomprehensible that we rely on a country that considers us to be an enemy for critical products, such as pharmaceuticals. And this has got to stop. We know that in China, their own pharmaceuticals are often adulterated, leading to the deaths of Chinese. Baby formula, for instance, was laced with melamine, which is sort of a plastic. This is something that we have witnessed for quite some time and have done very little or relatively little to protect ourselves. And I think the American people should be outraged at this, that we have a political class that is determined not to protect us, that is more loyal to their counterparts in China than they are to the American people. This has got to end. And it's going to end at the ballot box. And I hope it ends this November because we cannot continue this. And this is not just a complaint against President Biden's party. This is a complaint against Republicans, many of whom are more on board with communist China than the Democrats. So this is bipartisan failure. And we Americans have got to do something about it because this is our country. We have no place where you can go to. We've got to defend this ground.
You know what? I think you just answered the last question that I was going to give you because I don't like leaving our listeners. I don't like leaving people without an answer of what they can do to help, change this course of action. I think it's the American people, our republic, our democracy relies on each one of us participating in it in order to affect change. And, Gordon and I, We've known each other for a long time. And every time I see you speak, Gordon, I feel so moved by what you have to say. And I want to take action. I don't know if there's anything else you can add to this, but I know you said the ballot box. The ballot box is important. Is there anything else anybody can do to make a difference?
There are a number of small things that we can do. And there's one big thing. The big thing is to sever our relations with China. Trade, investment, technical cooperation, because China uses every point of contact with us to subvert our country. And until we can get a handle on this, because we're now being overwhelmed, we need to end those relationships. Things that you and I can do and everybody else, first of all, with our everyday purchasing decisions, if you can, don't buy the stuff that's made in China. Second thing, talk to your broker, sell any Chinese stocks, and sell mutual funds that hold Chinese stocks, because many of them do. And the third thing, and that is to get websites to include what's called cool information, COOL, country of origin labeling. Senator Rick Scott from Florida has been trying to include in the big China competition bill and a provision that would mandate that websites include country of origin labeling. Let's try to make this the law of the land. We Americans, with our everyday purchasing decisions and our everyday investment decisions, can make a difference. Now, I know this is going to be hard Grassroots lobbying, educating, electing candidates, that's difficult as well. But these are things we have to do. Just imagine, what are we going to tell our children and grandchildren when they realize we had the means to protect them and chose not to do so?
It was absolutely wonderful having Gordon Chang on the show. I know you all love him. I'm going to be bringing him back quite often. He's a good friend, and he's somebody that really is a true patriot fighting for our country. Before we get to the close of the show, I want to talk to you about another true patriot, and that's Mike Lindell. He is amazing, and he has a great American company, something that you all can support. Listen to what Gordon Chang said. Let's support great American companies and American workers. And Mike Lindell has a special offer. Actually, it's a BOGO extravaganza. That's buy one, get one free. Right now, you can get MyPillow bed sheets as low as $59.98, Elegance My Pillows as low as $49.98, and Roll and Go Anywhere My Pillows for $29.98. And you can get so much more, guys. Roll and Go Anywhere My Pillow. Use it on your couch, your recliner, in your car, on an airplane. Take it with you on vacation. It's versatile enough to do just about anything and to take about anywhere. Available in multiple colors and patterns. It's machine washable. It's dryable. I love them. You also get a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. It's a buy one, get one free extravaganza at mypillow.com/Carter. Bed sheets, My Pillows are just the tip of the iceberg. You know I have them all throughout my house. I love them and I buy them for my kids. Find the full list of BOGO offers by visiting mypillow.com/Carter or call 1-800-685-7221. Stock up with buy one, get one free savings today and get Mike's book. Listen to this. Get it for free with any purchase. mypillow.com/Carter or call 1-800-685-7221. mypillow.com/Carter. Thank you so much, Mike Lindell, for being a sponsor of this show. We love you here, and we love all the great American products that you make. Guys, before I close up, I want to talk to you a little bit about a story that I think you need to be paying very much attention to, and one that I am going to expand on in a future podcast. But it's about the FBI. And the FBI is apparently poised to punish agents who attended the January 6th political rally. This is absolutely crazy. Not only are they doing that, but they are also, according to Congressman Jim Jordan, I've spoken with him, I've spoken with people on Capitol Hill, are going after parents, even though they said they didn't. They actually tagged parents as domestic terrorists across this country that they believed who were standing up to the school boards against the COVID policies. This is just incredible. But let's talk about this, about punishing agents and how detrimental this is. The official Twitter account of the GOP House Judiciary Committee released this alarming warning last week saying, whistleblowers alert that the FBI appears to be attempting to terminate the employment of employees who were engaged in protected First Amendment activity on January 6, 2021. Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio added, we have serious concerns that the FBI appears to be retaliating against employees for engaging in political speech disfavored by FBI leadership. I am telling you right now, it is not just the FBI that is doing this. There are other agencies that are doing the same. They are combing through, and these agencies require their employees to come to them and talk to them. So I know this for a fact, to, debrief them on whether or not they were at the January 6th rally. And it sounds to me a lot like they are interrogating Americans and taking away their rights. There was nothing wrong with people going to this rally. If they were not involved in any criminal activity, the government has no business terminating their careers and terminating their jobs. This is absolutely ridiculous. Where are we? Where do we live? China? Are we part of the CCP now? Oh, maybe. I don't know, because Biden and Hunter Biden seem to have a lot of connections with the Chinese Communist Party, some that run really deep. So who knows? I don't know what's going on here. But this does not feel like America, folks. I just want to leave you with that thought. I want you to think about what this means. I want you to think about our nation and how it's up to each and every one of us to do our best to protect it. We are the patriots. You are the government. It's you, not them. We hire them to do the job. And guess what? We can fire them just as quickly. November cannot come fast enough, folks. November midterms, we've got to get out there and vote. 2024 is just around the corner. Do your best. Realize that you are a part of the solution. You are not the problem. The problem is up on Capitol Hill. Thanks again for following the Sara Carter Show. Go to my website, saracarter.com. Go to saracarter.com for all the latest stories. And remember, here, we're friends. We can talk to one another. Let me know who you'd like to have on the show, what you'd like us to talk about. I read your reviews. Download this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple, anywhere, Spreaker. Download the podcast, leave me a review, and let me know how you feel. And I'd be more than happy to talk about it on this show. Again, thank you for being a part of my show. Thank you for being a part of this great nation. God bless you. God bless America. And God bless the great state of Texas.
Today, I'm joined by Rebecca Weber, the CEO of the Association for Mature American Citizens. It's also known as AMAC. Explain the differences. What makes AMAC superior to AARP beyond the fact that we don't agree with their leftist ideology?
What makes us so unique is that we truly do take our marching orders from our membership. Before we go out and about and advocate for any issue, we do consult with our AMAC members, and we do that through a variety of ways. But that really makes us very different, where AARP stood in support of Obamacare, even though their membership was largely against. AMAC will stand in support of our membership. In addition, Sara, we offer benefits. We offer benefits just like the AARP. Ours are better because we offer choices. For example, you can call AMAC for your Medicare, and we're not going to do a one-size-fits-all one plan. The AARP endorses United Healthcare, whereas AMAC has its own trusted in-house licensed insurance advisors that are working for AMAC, stand for our mission of faith, family, and freedom, and then go about offering real choices. We do a lot of things like that that I think make us very different and make us, quite frankly, better.
Rebecca, thanks so much for being with me today. I'm honored to have you and AMAC as a sponsor for the Sara Carter Show. You know, for more information, folks, visit amac.us/Carter.
Hey guys, we know it's hard to keep up with all the news these days, but don't worry, because we're here to talk and laugh about it all. The White House Correspondents' Dinner happened and it was a complete joke. Biden is failing and there's polls to prove it. And there is now a truth minister. Hey, it's the Chicks here from the Chicks on the Right podcast. Download and subscribe to our daily podcast to hear us pick apart and pick on the news of the day. Politics to pop culture, nobody's safe, but it's all fun. Subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.